Welcome back to Conspiracy Files, our series here on Beyond the Known, where we really take a deep dive into some truly compelling mysteries.
And try to, really unpack what the research actually tells us.
Exactly. Now, in our first deep dive, you might recall we tackled the moon landing conspiracy. We looked at, well, everything from the waving flag to the apparent lack of stars in the photos. And ultimately what we found was that the overwhelming scientific and historical evidence really supports the fact that, yeah, those lunar landings did indeed happen.
It was a fascinating look, I thought, at how important it is to really examine both the claims and the data behind them.
It really was. And today, we're keeping our focus on iconic monuments and, well, some really big questions because we're diving into the enigma of the Sphinx.
The Sphinx. Always captivating.
Totally. For this deep dive, we're calling it the Sphinx conspiracy. And our goal is to first lay out what mainstream understanding tells us about this, colossal statue.
Yeah.
Then we're going to explore some of the more, well, I'd say unconventional theories surrounding where it came from and what its purpose might be.
And crucially, see how these alternative ideas hold up when we actually look at the scientific research.
Precise.
And we've really gathered quite a diverse range of research for this one. We'll be looking at transcripts from YouTube videos, Gaia and the Smithsonian Channel.
Right.
The Wikipedia entries for the Great Sphinx of Giza and the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, which is a big one. Excerpts from the Anubis theory. Reimagining the Great Sphinx of Giza, a piece from futurism called The Great Sphinx, echoes from 800,000 years ago. Quite a title there.
Oh, okay.
Material from the Pyramid Code documentary transcript, an overview from History Channel's resources on the Sphinx, and articles like Uncovering Secrets of the Sphinx and Uncovering the Sphinx's Secrets, Age and Erosion Revealed.
So yeah, quite a mix. Sounds like we've got a lot to get through.
We do. Quite a bit to unpack.
Okay, so let's start with the generally accepted view. What does the main body of archaeological research tell us about when and, well, why the Sphinx was built?
Okay, so the overwhelming archaeological evidence, the stuff most Egyptologists agree on, points to the creation of the Great Sphinx around 2500 BC.
2500 BC, okay.
Yeah, during the Old Kingdom period. This timing lines up perfectly with the reign of Pharaoh Khafre.
Khafre. He's the one with the second pyramid at Giza.
That's the one. The pyramid that stands just behind the Sphinx as you look at it. It all seems to be part of one big plan.
Right, so it wasn't just like randomly placed there. It's part of this larger architectural complex.
Exactly. And the Sphinx itself is, well, it's remarkable in how it was constructed. It's a monolith.
Meaning?
Meaning it was carved directly from a single huge piece of the bedrock of the Giza Plateau.
Wow. Not built from blocks, but carved out of the ground.
Precisely. And interestingly, this very same bedrock, this limestone, also served as the quarry for the pyramids and other structures nearby.
Talk about using local resources. So they essentially sculpted it right out of the existing landscape.
They did. There's also a fascinating idea proposed by the Egyptian geologist Farouk El-Baz. He suggested that the head of the Sphinx might have been carved first.
Oh.
From a natural geological formation called a yardang. It's like a ridge of rock shaped by wind erosion over time.
So nature gave them a head start, potentially?
Potentially, yeah. He theorizes that the trench or ditch you see around the Sphinx was quarried out later, allowing them to then shape the complete body.
That's a really compelling image. Nature starts the process, and then the ancient Egyptians come in and refine it.
It is, and the stones that were cut away from the Sphinx enclosure, they were actually used to build the temple directly in front of it.
The Sphinx temple, right?
Exactly. However, research suggests that neither the enclosure nor that temple were ever fully completed.
Really? Why not?
Well, some interpret this as meaning that a dedicated, widespread Sphinx cult didn't really become established right then, back in the Old Kingdom.
That's interesting. You'd think a monument of that scale would immediately inspire a major following.
You might think so, yeah. Something else that's really significant is its orientation.
Okay.
The Sphinx faces directly east, towards the rising sun. This is very much in line with the ancient Egyptian solar cult and their, deep reverence for the sun god Ra.
That makes perfect sense, aligning it with their core religious beliefs. Now, you mentioned the strong link to Khafre. What specific research connects the Sphinx to him?
Right. There's actually quite a bit of evidence linking the Sphinx specifically to Khafre. For instance, a life-size statue of Khafre himself, carved from this really striking, dark, volcanic rock, diorite, I think. It was discovered right near the Sphinx in the Valley Temple. Auguste Mariette found it.
Finding a statue of the pharaoh right there does seem like a pretty direct tie-in, doesn't it?
It really does. And furthermore, you have remnants of a stone causeway, just basically a paved processional path. This causeway connected that valley temple, the one by the Sphinx, directly to Khafre's own mortuary temple, which is right next to his pyramid.
Ah, so it physically links the Sphinx area to Khafre's pyramid complex.
Exactly. This physical connection across the landscape really strengthens the association. It suggests it's all part of one cohesive architectural plan centered around Khafre.
Okay, so the location, the nearby statue, the causeway, what else?
Well, then there's the discovery of the Sphinx temple itself, located immediately in front of the Sphinx.
Yeah, you mentioned they used the stone quarried from the enclosure for that.
Right. And its ground plan, its layout, shows a remarkable similarity to the Valley Temple next door. Again, suggesting they were part of the same construction period and likely dedicated to the same pharaoh.
More architectural parallels. Okay, keep going.
There's also a cartouche, the oval ring with the pharaoh's name inside.
Yep.
One belonging to Thutmose V was found kind of concealed within a wall enclosing the Sphinx. Now, Thutmose V ruled much later, around 1400 BC.
So way after Khafre.
Way after. But its presence suggests that he undertook restoration work on the Sphinx, which was already ancient by his time. Or perhaps he sought to protect it somehow. It shows later pharaohs recognized its importance.
Okay, so even centuries later, it was still a major monument needing attention.
Absolutely. But perhaps one of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from geology, the work of geologist Peter Lacouvar.
What did he find?
His research identified matching patterns in the limestone, like specific layers and even fossils in the rock that makes up the Sphinx's body, and in the walls of the quarry in Khafre's temples nearby.
Wow, like a geological fingerprint connecting them all?
Exactly. It's not just about where it is. The very material it's made from tells a story, linking it directly to Khafre's other construction projects.
That's incredible. Okay, that sounds pretty solid. Anything else?
Yes, and this part is really fascinating, the astronomical alignments. Mark
Yeah.
Lehner's work has shown that during the spring and fall equinoxes, the sun appears to set directly into the shoulder of the Sphinx, and then it aligns perfectly with the southern side of Khafre's pyramid on the horizon.
Whoa.
And get this, at that precise moment, the shadows cast by both the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid seem to merge into one.
Wow. That sounds like way more than just a coincidence. That feels very intentional.
It strongly suggests deliberate solar symbolism, doesn't it? Zahi Hawass, another prominent Egyptologist, interpreted this alignment further. He proposed that the Sphinx represents Khafre as Horus.
The falcon god, the royal god.
Right. Representing Khafre as Horus, presenting offerings with his paws towards the rising and setting sun, which represents his father Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, identified with the sun god Ra, all within this sacred temple complex.
So it's all interwoven, their religion, the pharaoh's divine power, the cycles of the sun and stars. It's complex.
It is incredibly complex and deeply symbolic. And we should also just pause to remember the sheer scale we're talking about.
Yeah, it's huge.
It stands nearly 60 feet high, that's like a 6-story building, and stretches about 240 feet long. It's the largest single-stone statue known to exist anywhere in the world.
Just mind-boggling.
And originally, remember, before its face was damaged over the centuries, most scholars believe it bore the features of Pharaoh Khafre himself.
Okay, so a monumental structure, clearly connected to a specific pharaoh, Khafre, integrated into his pyramid complex, aligned with the sun, built around 2500 BC using local stone. That seems like a pretty solid mainstream understanding.
That's the picture painted by the bulk of the archaeological and geological evidence, yes.
But, as we know, there are other ideas out there. Some very different ideas. Let's delve into some of the fringe theories now. Starting with that popular claim, you mentioned the idea that the Sphinx is much, much older because of water erosion.
Yes, the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis. This one gained a lot of traction, particularly through the work of people like René Schwaller de Lubitsch, John Anthony West, and the geologist Robert Shook.
Right, Shook. What's their core argument?
Their argument is essentially that the weathering patterns you see on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the deep vertical fissures, look like they were caused by prolonged heavy rainfall over a very long period.
Okay.
And their point is that the climate around Giza during Khafre's time, around 2500 BC, was already quite arid, much like it is today. It wouldn't have had the kind of rainfall needed to create that specific type of erosion.
So they're saying the erosion must have happened earlier when the climate was much wetter.
Exactly. Suggesting the Sphinx must predate Khafre, maybe by thousands of years, pushing its origins back into a much earlier, perhaps pre-dynastic period.
And this older dating often gets tied into ideas about, like, the legendary lost civilization of Atlantis, doesn't it?
It often does, yeah. Proposing that some sophisticated civilization existed long before the known pharaohs, and maybe they built the Sphinx. Robert Schoaf specifically argued about the granite-facing stones found on parts of the enclosure and the Valley Temple.
What about them?
He claimed they covered limestone that was already deeply weathered underneath, implying the limestone erosion happened before those granite blocks, which we know are from the Old Kingdom, were put in place.
Okay, that sounds like a compelling point, at least on the surface. Deep erosion under newer stones. But what does the mainstream scientific research say about this water erosion hypothesis?
Well, mainstream scholarship, Egyptologists and geologists alike, largely view this hypothesis as pseudo-archaeology.
Pseudo-archaeology. Why?
Because there's a substantial body of evidence, archaeological, climatological, and geological, that contradicts it. Peter Lacavara, for example, the geologist we mentioned earlier.
With the matching rock layers.
Right. He suggests that some of those erosional features on the enclosure walls might actually be attributable to the quarrying activities themselves. You know, the marks left when they were cutting out the stone blocks to build the temples.
Ah, okay. So not necessarily rain, but tool marks or the process of quarrying could look similar or contribute to the weathering patterns.
Exactly. It could certainly contribute. Furthermore, there's dating evidence. Techniques like luminescence dating.
Which tells you when something was last exposed to sunlight, right?
Correct. Luminescence dating has been applied to materials from both the Sphinx Temple and the Khafre Valley Temple. The results consistently place their construction in the middle to late 3rd millennium BC.
Which is?
Right in the 4th dynasty, contemporary with Khafre. These dates also match up well with radiocarbon dates obtained from the Giza pyramids themselves.
So multiple independent dating methods all point back to the same time frame, Khafre's time.
They do. And another really significant challenge for the water erosion hypothesis is, well, the complete lack of any other archaeological evidence for a pre-dynastic civilization capable of building something like the Sphinx. Meaning, if there was some advanced culture there thousands of years before Khafre, where are their tools? Where are their settlements, their pottery, their burials, anything else that would indicate they existed and have the technology and social organization for such a massive project?
Yeah.
We just don't find that evidence.
That's a pretty major hole in the theory, isn't it? If a civilization built the Sphinx thousands of years before the Egyptians we know, where's all the other proof they were even there?
Precisely. It's a critical absence of evidence. And then there's the climate data itself.
What does that show?
Climate research suggests that, yes, North Africa was wetter in the distant past, but arid conditions began setting in across the Egyptian Sahara as early as 5300 BC and gradually spread south. While there were definitely climate fluctuations during the Old Kingdom, maybe wetter periods than today, the data doesn't really support the kind of prolonged torrential rainfall needed to cause that specific type of deep erosion way back in, say, 10,000 BC or earlier, which is the time frame often proposed by proponents of the theory.
So the climate history of the region doesn't actually back up the idea of a much older, super wet Giza when the Sphinx would supposedly have been carved.
Not in the way the hypothesis requires, no. And Mark Lehner also directly addressed Schoch's point about the weathered limestone under the granite facing.
What was his explanation?
Lehner argues that the limestone wasn't actually deeply weathered by rain beforehand. Instead, he suggests it was intentionally cut back in an irregular way, specifically to key in the harder granite-facing blocks. It was a construction technique.
Ah, so the uneven surface wasn't erosion, it was deliberate shaping to fit the casing stones.
That's the interpretation supported by looking at how other monuments were built. Lehner points to the nearby Menkaure Pyramid Temple as another clear example where you can see this exact technique being used.
Okay, that makes sense as a building method.
And one more thing on erosion. Colin Reeder did a geomorphological study. He suggested that the variations in weathering we see on the Sphinx and its enclosure are perfectly consistent with the known Giza environment. Wind, blowing sand, occasional moisture, salts in the rock, and crucially, the fact that the Sphinx was murrayed up to its neck in sand for huge periods of its history.
Right, the sand would protect some parts more than others.
Exactly. So the differential weathering, the different patterns, can likely be explained by these known long-term processes rather than needing some ancient catastrophic rainfall event.
Okay, so the water erosion theory, while it sounds intriguing, seems to face some pretty significant hurdles when you look at the dating, the lack of supporting archaeology, the climate data, and alternative explanations for the features.
That's a fair summary of the mainstream perspective, yes.
All right. What about the Orion correlation theory? That also proposes a much older date based on stars, right?
That's right. The Orion correlation theory, most famously linked with Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock, focuses on the alignment of the three Great Pyramids with the stars in Orion's belt. But it also brings in the Sphinx.
How so?
The theory suggests the Sphinx wasn't primarily oriented to the rising sun in the east as part of a solar cult around 2500 BC. Instead, proponents argue it was deliberately aligned to face due east to watch the constellation of Leo rise directly in front of it during the vernal equinox.
Okay.
Around the year 10,500 BC.
10,500 BC again. That same time frame. Why Leo?
Because the Sphinx is a lion-bodied creature. So the idea is the Sphinx, a lion, is looking at its celestial counterpart, Leo the lion, in this astronomically significant epoch, roughly 12,500 years ago.
And this, again, gets linked to ideas of a lost golden age or advanced civilization.
Yes, exactly. Hancock and Bauval laid this out in their book, The Message of the Sphinx, and it was featured in a BBC program, too. It often intertwines with ideas of, a lost advanced civilization predating the Egyptians, potentially Atlantis, or sometimes even bringing in ancient astronauts.
Right. The notion that some highly sophisticated pre-dynastic culture with incredibly advanced astronomical knowledge built these monuments according to a grand celestial plan. That, again, what does mainstream research say about this particular alignment theory for the Sphinx?
Well, much like the water erosion hypothesis, the Orion correlation theory, specifically regarding the Sphinx facing Leo in 10,500 BC, is generally considered pseudo-archaeology by the academic community.
And the reason?
The primary reason is, again, the complete lack of any supporting evidence from the Egyptians themselves. There are no ancient texts, no inscriptions, no other archaeological finds that state or even hint that the Sphinx was built to align with Leo in 10,500 BC, or that this date held any special significance for its builders.
So while the astronomical alignment might exist mathematically if you go back that far, there's zero proof that the builders intended it or were even aware of it.
Precisely. The mainstream view is that the Eastern orientation is overwhelmingly explained by the solar cult of the Old Kingdom pharaohs, which we do have ample evidence for. Attributing it to a specific constellation 8,000 years earlier lacks any concrete proof within the actual archaeological or textual record of ancient Egypt.
So it's an interesting pattern noticed much later, but not evidence of the builder's intent back then.
That's the prevailing academic view. And this fundamental lack of supporting evidence is really the key issue with many of these alternative theories, including the broader ones involving ancient astronauts or a direct Atlantis connection. They often rely on interpreting patterns or perceived anomalies without grounding them in verifiable historical or archaeological context.
Right, and figures like Graham Hancock, as we saw mentioned in that Gaia video transcript research.
Yeah.
He even takes it further, suggesting the Sphinx might be communicating like a universal language of mathematics and astronomy, possibly to extraterrestrials, acting as some kind of contact point or even an Earth portal, maybe linked to unexplained artifacts in the Cairo Museum?
Yes, those kinds of ideas definitely push into highly speculative territory. They're certainly captivating concepts that fire up the imagination, suggesting hidden knowledge and cosmic connections. But from a scientific standpoint, there's just no empirical basis for them. The existence and nature of universal mathematical languages for ET communication or Earth portals or Atlantean high technology connected to museum artifacts, these are entirely unproven concepts outside the realm of current scientific understanding.
Okay, so we're moving pretty far into the realm of pure speculation there. What about Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet? He made a specific prediction about the Sphinx, didn't he? The Hall of Records.
He did. Back in the 1930s, Edgar Cayce, in one of his trance states, predicted the discovery of a hidden chamber, a hall of records, beneath the paws of the Sphinx.
And what was supposed to be in it?
It was said to contain records and knowledge from the lost civilization of Atlantis. And he gave a specific time frame. He predicted it would be found around 1998.
1998. Oh, okay, I remember hearing about that. It generated a lot of buzz in the sort of fringe history and New Age communities back in the 90s, didn't it?
It absolutely did. As 1998 approached, there was significant anticipation and speculation about whether this Hall of Records would finally be revealed. There were even some seismic surveys and, I believe, some limited drilling attempts around the Sphinx, partly fueled by this prediction.
And what happened in 1998? Did they find Atlantis under the Sphinx's paws?
No. The predicted Hall of Records was not found. Despite the searches and the interest, nothing corresponding to Case's description turned up.
So a clear prediction that just didn't come to pass.
Correct. And that lack of any corroborating discovery significantly diminished the traction of that particular theory, although the idea of hidden chambers somewhere on the Sphinx still persists in some circles.
Okay. So that one seemed to have a specific test, and it failed. Now let's shift focus slightly. There was another theory mentioned in our research, Robert Temple's Anubis theory. What's that about? It suggests the Sphinx wasn't originally Khafre.
Right. Robert K.G. Temple proposed a pretty radical reinterpretation. He suggests the Sphinx wasn't originally a lion with the human head of Khafre at all.
Then what was it?
He argues it was originally a massive statue of the jackal god Anubis, the god associated with funerals, mummification, the afterlife. A very important deity.
Anubis, the whole statue. But it looks like a lion.
Well, his idea is that it was originally a colossal, crouching jackal, perhaps guarding the Giza necropolis, and that later, much later, in the Middle Kingdom period, its head was recarved into the likeness of a specific pharaoh, Amenemhet II.
Okay, that's a big change. What evidence does he base this on? It seems like a stretch.
Temple bases his argument primarily on stylistic details of the Sphinx's head and face, particularly the style of the Neme's headdress, the pleating on it, and the eye makeup. He argues these features are not typical of the Old Kingdom style associated with Khafre, but are actually more similar to depictions of Anubis and, crucially, to the known royal iconography of Pharaoh Amenemhet II from the Middle Kingdom hundreds of years later.
Interesting. So he's looking closely at the art style and saying it doesn't fit Khafre, it fits this later pharaoh, and maybe the body was originally something else entirely Anubis?
That's the core of his contention, yes. Looking very closely at those specific artistic features.
But what does mainstream Egyptology say? Do they buy the Anubis turned Amenemhet theory?
No, mainstream Egyptology largely disagrees with this reinterpretation. While acknowledging Temple's detailed stylistic analysis, they point back to the overwhelming contextual evidence we discussed earlier.
The location, the temples, the causeway, the Khafre statue found nearby, the geology linking it to Khafre's quarry.
Exactly. All that archaeological and geological context strongly ties the Sphinx to the Old Kingdom, and specifically to Khafre's Giza complex. In the view of most Egyptologists, that broader context simply outweighs the specific stylistic arguments Temple makes about the headdress or eyes potentially resembling a later period or different god. The association with Khafre and the Fourth Dynasty is just too strong based on the overall site evidence.
So the big picture evidence points firmly to Khafre, making the Anubis theory a minority view based on interpreting specific, maybe ambiguous details.
That's a good way to put it. And finally, just to cover all of the bases from our research, there was that Futurism article mentioning a really fringe claim.
The 800,000 years one.
Yeah. Tying the supposed water erosion not just to 10,000 BC, but way, way back to geological events around 800,000 years ago, when North Africa apparently had vast freshwater lakes.
800,000 years ago? That's well before Homo sapiens were even widespread, isn't it? Let alone building colossal statues.
Indeed. This extremely ancient dating is just completely outside the bounds of accepted archaeology and geology regarding human civilization or monumental construction. It's overwhelmingly rejected by the scientific community. As we've established, the consensus firmly places the Sphinx's construction within the Old Kingdom around 4,500 years ago, not nearly a million. There's simply zero credible evidence to support such an extraordinarily ancient origin.
Okay, so that one falls squarely into the realm of extreme speculation, completely detached from the scientific understanding of human history and geology.
Pretty much, yes.
Now, the Wikipedia page did briefly mention the existence of various holes and tunnels within the Sphinx itself. Are these often woven into these conspiracy theories about hidden chambers and things?
Yes, the research notes mention several known holes and tunnels. There's a shaft in the top of the head, another hole dug by explorer Howard Vyse, sometimes called Paring's Hole, a passage near the rump, and possibly others.
Okay.
These are generally understood by Egyptologists to be either original structural features, maybe related to the carving process, or, more likely, the result of later explorations, treasure hunting attempts in antiquity, or even later damage and repair efforts.
So not necessarily secret entrances.
While fringe theories absolutely love to incorporate these holes and tunnels into narratives about, hidden Atlantean libraries or secret access points to underground networks,
Right.
within the mainstream understanding, they're simply seen as part of the physical structure and the long, complex history of the monument itself. Interesting features, yes, but not necessarily proof of hidden conspiracies.
Okay. So To kind of wrap up this section on the alternative ideas, it sounds like a recurring theme is a lack of solid, verifiable evidence.
That's definitely a key takeaway. As the Wikipedia resource explicitly notes, many of these alternative theories we've touched on, the extreme age, the non-coffer builders, the hidden chambers, the ET connections, they lack sufficient supporting evidence and are often directly contradicted by the existing body of scientific research.
And that's why the academic community generally labels them as pseudo-history or pseudo-archaeology.
Exactly. It's not about dismissing curiosity, but about evaluating claims against the evidence we actually have.
It seems clear that while the mystery and the sheer presence of the Sphinx are undeniably captivating, and they absolutely spark a lot of imaginative ideas.
They certainly do.
The established scientific understanding, which is supported by multiple converging lines of evidence, geology, archaeology, inscriptions, context, remains pretty robust.
It does. And yet, as that pasted text excerpt reminded us, the Sphinx undoubtedly holds this powerful symbolic significance, doesn't it? Maybe representing humanity's enduring quest to understand our origins, to uncover buried truths, whatever they may be.
Yeah, and the Smithsonian Channel piece also emphasized that enduring enigma, the fact that despite centuries of study, there's still so much we don't definitively know. It keeps drawing us back.
It absolutely does. It remains one of the world's great mysteries, even within the mainstream framework.
So to bring our deep dive into the Sphinx conspiracy to a close, we've seen the mainstream understanding point strongly towards its construction by Pharaoh Khafre, probably around 2500 BC. It seems intimately connected to his pyramid complex, his solar cult, deeply rooted in the religious beliefs and the political power structures of that era.
Yes, that's the picture supported by the weight of the evidence.
Yeah.
And while the various fringe theories about extreme age, different builders like Anubis or Atlanteans, hidden wreckers, cosmic alignments from millennia ago, well, they can be really intriguing to consider, and they certainly ignite our curiosity.
They do make you think, what if?
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
But it's just vital, isn't it, to evaluate them critically against the substantial body of scientific, archaeological, and historical research that's been built up over decades.
Exactly. It's about weighing those imaginative possibilities against the hard data. And while the enduring mystery of the Sphinx continues to fascinate, and, ongoing research using new technologies might well uncover new details about this incredible monument.
And it probably will.
It sounds like the core understanding of its origin within Khafre's Old Kingdom remains firmly supported by the evidence we currently possess.
That seems to be the case, yes. So perhaps the best approach for you, our listeners, is to continue your own exploration of the Sphinx and the wonders of ancient Egypt.
Definitely.
But do it with a critical eye. Seek out credible sources, reputable research, archaeologists, Egyptologists. Engage in that critical thinking. Appreciate the genuine wonder of this ancient world, but try to stay grounded in the evidence that's actually available.
Well said. It's about finding that balance between marveling at the mystery and respecting the scientific process. Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Sphinx conspiracy here on Beyond the Known.
It was fascinating to discuss.
If you enjoyed this exploration, please do take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're listening. It helps others find the show and ensures you won't miss our future deep dives into mysteries and the facts behind them.